Are you a robot?
Won't worry about my bad intros.
But I thought the funny thing, I didn't mention this with you. I thought the funny thing was you sort of stealing my limelight with the European regulations by siphoning off my LinkedIn juice. Like, oh, Charles has published something that's gone viral. Let's just copy and paste it and see how much of his traffic I can get.
Well, I didn't want to do any original thinking, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to put my foot in my mouth either and say something that it wasn't. So I figured the safest way to do that would be just to take what you said and then put it on my LinkedIn. And it ended up being viral for me too. So thanks for that.
Yeah. So like, I feel like one of those sort of songwriters that no one's ever heard of, but made like 16 smash hits. They're sitting in some sort of basement studio, poor and sad because no one remembers that it was them that wrote the music.
Exactly. They've been ripped off so many times that you can't retrace it to them. So, and then somebody who wrote me, somebody ripped off mine and put it in Portuguese. So yours, I mean, technically, but they ripped off mine. They just cut it because the 6 points that you made were too many. And they said, here's the top 4 things you need to know. And then, and then somebody also put it into, so there was one person that did that took it from 6 to 4. And then another person took it and they just translated into Portuguese. But what they did do that was wrong in Portuguese, because I read it and I understood the Portuguese. They were like, oh yeah, so this is the GDPR update. And I was like, not quite. And because in Brazil, they have they have their own GDPR. And so they were basically saying, okay, this is what we've got coming next, because this is what's going on in Europe with GDPR. And I was like, that's not quite what's going on, but all right, maybe we'll consider it lost in translation.
How funny. It's also funny that someone took it and made it the top 4 or something, because I definitely wasn't writing that in order. I was just writing it in order it came into my head. So I wonder if the 10 commandments started as a 25 commandments, and then someone just nicked them, translated them into Hebrew, and then Moses came along and said, I've only got space for 10, I'll just do the top 10.
This stone, he got tired after writing the first 10. He said, it's too much work to do all 25 of these. We'll figure it out.
Oh my goodness. Can you imagine chiseling away for months on end in a piece of rock? That must be a nightmare.
Yeah. So anyway, yes, I stole your thunder shamelessly, and I'm proud of it. I'll do it again if you let me, even if you don't let me.
Well, I just restrain myself on LinkedIn, or I'll block you or something. The problem is every post I do, right, I end up tagging you on it, because you've always got something to say that's useful. So I'll forgive you. Don't worry. I'll forgive you. It's Friday. It's a forgiveness day. So
there we go.
You can't go into the weekend bearing grudges.
That's a smart way to play it. I like that mentality.
So I guess that's quite a useful bridge into the season, because it was really deep, I thought, and you kind of got into Zen. I thought the story of the daughter that lived across the street, and you tried about 20 different versions of telling that story to Roger Spitz, and then he was like, right. Yeah, I haven't heard that one before.
I could.
That was a highlight for me.
I could tell you. I could tell you it again. It's a great story, though. I mean, it's basically just making the point that he wanted to make, which was change happens and you got to be impartial about it.
And you guys bonded. I know you guys got something big in common with each other. Do you remember what that was?
Besides the Zen?
The
vegetarian? Is he a vegetarian?
No. Well, he might be, but that wasn't what I remember.
I don't remember. What did we have in common?
He also really struggles with GDPR or GPDR or GRPD.
Those damn acronyms. That's true. I do remember him saying that.
I thought that
No.
was funny. I thought that was very funny.
So it's not
But
only you.
Roger, I mean, Roger, like, I mean, to hear someone, I mean, all the guests we get are really high caliber, but Roger, Roger was in a kind of league of his own. I thought he was so well read, so articulate, had so much original thought to contribute. I mean, even I can't remember when that episode went out, maybe a week ago. I think it's the best performing episode we've had yet, like of any of our episodes. It's done really well. And I'm not surprised because it was really an hour of quality, and I think you did a really good job of kind of holding your own with him, because you know the guy's formidably intelligent, and you guys went deep, and then you had, I think that came on the back of Yona. That, my goodness, that was a deep episode.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess I want to start with those two because for me they were like really, really interesting conversations. Like, what was the highlight for you?
Well, for me, sitting there and with Roger, it was like he was preaching to the choir. Everything he was saying, I was just sitting there like, yes, of course, yes, you just say this a million times better than I could. and that idea of being ready and like preparing yourself for change and knowing that change is going to happen and knowing that you need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable is just so brilliant. And I love that idea. And I mean, that's half the reason I moved outside of the US, is because I wanted to be in a place where I was not as comfortable as in my own culture, right? I wanted to go to a different place that I didn't speak the language as well. I didn't know anybody. I wanted to be uncomfortable. And so preparing yourself for that discomfort, and it's so cliche almost, but you see it so many times on those diagrams, right? The like your comfort zone and where the magic happens. We've all seen that on various social media posts, I imagine. But that's what it feels like, and he was able to capture the essence of that and say it just wonderfully.
You did tell me the story. Like, what took you outside the US originally? What took you to Spain?
So I was in India, and another reason, like I went to India because I was trying to do something outside my comfort zone, and it all started when I went to Spain when I was in university, and while I was there, I went to Morocco as like a little side trip, and that was so different. And because of that, I wanted more of this like really, really different culture, because Spain was a different culture and it was amazing, but it's like a soft culture shock, I would call it. Like everything that is shocking about the culture is good in a way from when you're coming from like a Western world, right? There's nothing that's like, oh my God, I would never do that. Or I don't really like that much. I mean, maybe being the vegetarian I am now, like the running of the bulls, maybe you're not so into that. And anyway, I went to Morocco, and while I was there, it was a harder culture shock, we could say, but I loved it. And I loved being in a place that was so different. And so then I continued that excursion to the next time that I was I went to Greece in the summer times to visit my family. And then I did a little like side trip to Turkey. And it was the same thing, like, whoa, this culture is way different. Oh, and I really enjoyed that whole aspect. And so I wanted to see how extreme I could go with that. And then I found myself in India. I went across the world. I went to India, and I originally thought it was just going to be people debating the Bhagavad Gita in cafes. Boy, was I wrong. As soon as I got off the airport, it was like a brick hit me in the face with smells and then like reality and all of that. And so when I was there, I met a girl who was studying in Spain, and So I went back, I finished university, and then I went to be closer to her in Spain. And then after like a month of being in Spain, she was like, yeah, this isn't really working out like I thought it would. And I had this year of being in Spain, and I thought, wow, there's really worse places to be stuck. Like a lot of people would be ecstatic to be in my situation right now, to be in Spain, and so I better make the most of it. And while I was there and just enjoying the cultural differences, and then enjoying being in my 20s in Spain and having the Spanish nightlife and the Spanish vibes, then I decided, well, you know what? I really like being outside of the US, and I think I'm going to keep doing it for as long as I can. And I haven't been back since. I mean, I've been back to visit, but I haven't been back to live since 2010.
Wow.
So that was the
So
long
20,
roundabout way of telling you the
2010
story.
was when you went from India to Spain. So
Yeah, I
um,
had a backpack and a guitar. That was all I owned.
wow.
And now I've got a
It's
bunch
funny.
of crap.
I can definitely relate. I can definitely relate to some of that. But I guess my experience is different in that, like a frisbee or something on a piece of
Boomerang.
string, I've always kind of found myself hurtling back to the UK. So I've always been very interested in living outside of my comfort zone. But for some reason, the UK has always called me back.
Mm.
And I've lived in France and Germany and the US. And maybe I'll get an opportunity to live abroad again. But I feel like I've put some deep roots down now in the UK, so maybe it's too hard for me to shift. But I think the thing that I find so interesting is that it's so difficult to. I mean, you obviously got a pretty good grasp of language, but it's so difficult to live in a country, and like your situation, being in Spain by yourself, with maybe not a fluent grasp of the language, not really knowing anyone, and then having to kind of make your way in the world and kind of, get a flat, get a job, figure out where the supermarket is, what the hell of stuff is you're buying, and build a life. That is so difficult. And I think only those people who've experienced that can really understand like how hard it is, that kind of immigrant journey that that so few people experience. But looks like you got some technical fun going on.
Wait, yeah, 1 second.
You plugged your microphone in.
Yeah, my microphone just stopped working for some reason.
There we go.
I think
now I'm
there
back.
you go.
So anyway, I wholeheartedly agree with you. It is not easy to live abroad, but it is a beautiful thing. And this goes back to what Roger was saying, like being ready and training that discomfort, training that like a muscle, being okay with being everything not being okay. And that's why I was like, man, he's preaching to the choir. I wholeheartedly agree with him on this statement, and I cannot articulate it as much as he is doing. He is just making the case for it. So if anybody wanted the reasons as to why you should go and travel, well, if you can, once COVID is all patched up, hopefully soon-ish, then maybe this has convinced you.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of discontinuity theme with Yono as well, I think was quite powerful. And I think he made a very strong case, this idea of zero exclusion, I think is how he described it. The fact that we should sort of turn this question on the head, that we're not just we shouldn't be just seeking inclusivity and diversity for the sake of it. We should be trying to weed out why it is that we were intolerant or exclusive in the first place. The thing I disagreed with him about, and I didn't really want to disagree with him too much, but the thing I really disagreed with him about is that he kind of alluded to the fact that there's a business case for diversity, and that was like a strong reason. And I just felt, to me, that's not the reason why. I think diversity certainly in the workplace and in a team structure, it's something which we should be doing because it's the right thing to do. And I think for me that's the goal. And the business case, I think, almost kind of ruins that in a way. And it's almost a little bit like there's a lot of obviously research at the moment in terms of the business case for why addressing climate risks is important, or the business case for minimizing plastic pollution, or any other kind of ESG issue. But to me, the business case is not the reason. And I guess that's for me the kind of this question about ESG is we need ESG as a kind of counterbalance to a business case in many respects. The idea that you can evaluate things and compare things because of their externalities, not because they have a business case. And I guess that for me, that was the thing which I kind of wanted to jump in the conversation with Yono and ask about. But like you were having the conversation with him, did you have a kind of reaction to that, or what was your kind of perspective?
So just a heads up, my microphone's gone out again. I don't know what is happening here, but it seems like it's one of those days.
I can hear you. I can hear you really.
All right. So yes, at the end of the day, it's not only that. Like, we shouldn't only focus on that, but I don't know. I can see the point of there is a business case to be made, and if that's what's going to actively cause change, then we should probably look at it and tell people about it. I don't know. That's my opinion. Like, we shouldn't disregard it.
I guess I worry about doing the things for the right reasons versus doing the right things for the wrong reasons. And I guess I worry that there's a lot of effort trying to put a business case around these things, which maybe is a bit contrived. And I think I think if we could all get comfortable that, it's not just I guess ESG is not a very helpful acronym, because it feels like you're putting three boxes together and limiting yourself to those three labels. But to me, it's all about non-financial impact. It's about the kind of measuring the externalities, and therefore, there may well be unexpected financial benefits in being strong on ESG measures, but to me, that's not the reason to do it. And I think this is fascinating. There's a lot of people in the ESG space who are really preoccupied by this question of is there a business case? Do ESG investments perform better? If they do, great, that's fantastic. But I worry that it's missing the point of it. That's, I guess, my perspective. I'm probably going to make a lot of enemies in the ESG space by these kind of very unfashionable comments I'm making, but I'm thinking out loud. This is raw.
Well, I do think it is valuable to come at it like that, because you're coming from this moral space, right? Like, this is the right thing to do. I like
whether or not it's going to give us benefits on the business side is an afterthought. So I appreciate that way of thinking. I just wonder if the idea of making the business case is going to instill the change that we're looking for, then why not use it as like another tool in the toolbox?
Yeah, no, okay, fair enough. Another tool. I agree. But I guess I was on a webinar a week or so ago. I won't mention any names because I don't want to make any enemies. But I was on a webinar and there was somebody from one of the big social media companies on the webinar, and they were saying that they were trying to defend social media platforms by saying it's not in our interests to allow hate speech. It's not in our interests to have harmful content on our platform, and the reason it's not in our interests is because advertisers don't want to be aligned to those comments, to that content, and therefore if we don't fix this problem, they're going to stop advertising with us, and then when we won't have any money, and then we won't have a business. And it was just like such a piss poor argument, because the argument was like saying, oh, I work for a gun company, and none of us in the gun company want to see children shot. It's not in our interest, and therefore it's not in our business model, and et cetera, et cetera. It's like, that's not the point. Like, it's clear that this is not financially what you are setting out to intend, but it is an unintended consequence of your business model, of your process, of everything you're doing. And maybe that's what needs a bit of a rethink. And I guess that question has really kind of come out a bit in the last week with the the result from the Facebook's oversight board deciding to uphold the ban on Trump for another 6 months and sort of push the question back to Facebook. But I think the debate that's being had there is kind of missing the point. The debate is about how do we send, in that case, it's about how do you censor Trump? How do you be consistent with the rules? And then people get sucked into, well, how do we stop incitements to violence, and how do we stop hate speech, and how do we police this thing? And I think the answer is that maybe the thing is unpoliceable. Maybe it's just fundamentally unsustainable, and it's not about a business case, or it's not about what's the right balance of how much money it could make, but maybe it's just the wrong thing to be doing. Maybe we should think again about these platforms.
But then what is your alternative that you're proposing? Because of course you can't say, okay, we're just going to get rid of social media.
I think Roger kind of made this point that the problem with regulation and governance is it can have a lot of unintended consequences. So that's the caveat to what I'm about to say. But I think the other thread that you picked up on with him, and you also picked up on with oh my goodness, I always forget his name, Zachary in season 1 or 2, history repeating itself.
Oh yeah.
History kind of repeats itself in terms of the mistakes that we make, but also I think we can learn a lot from history in terms of the good things that happen. So if you think about the telephone network, I mean, let's take like social media and look at analogies that we've had in the past. The telephone network, I can buy a handset from any company and it works on a telephone network, and I have choice to shop around, and I can have different commercial models on that network, and I can call you and you can call me, you can send me an SMS, I can send you an SMS, and it doesn't really matter who you're with, who I'm with. None of these questions come into being. And it's the same with email. Email is a protocol. The protocol is something which is out in the wild, and different companies can connect it with that protocol in creating mail exchange servers, and you can send me an email and I can send you an email, and we're on different platforms, and that's absolutely fine. And I think really that's the relationship we need to be having with social media, Twitter and Facebook, I would say particularly, but also like WhatsApp and others, is that we need to be thinking about an interoperability standard whereby if it was me in charge, I would force Facebook not to break themselves up, but I would force Facebook to open up their protocol, their API, so that, you know, Demetrios could create his own social network, plug into Facebook, have people on that, and you could control content and moderate content your way, and, you know, and have a proper competitive ecosystem. And I guess for me, that's the thing. If I was to change one thing about the tech industry, that would be the one thing I would change, would be to force an opening of protocols to create an interoperability. And to me, the conversation you had with Sarah, the conversation you had with Dorothea about content moderation and you know, Clubhouse in particular with Dorothea, I think a lot of those issues would fall away if there was just a better competitive market around these things. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm just trying to see how your idea of creating an open, like this open idea, how that would actually look if I had my own platform and then it plugged into Facebook. Like, what would be the benefit of Facebook there? You know what I mean? How would Facebook be part of that? And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is, it feels like the EU is trying to do that a little bit with some of these new regulations, not the one I stole from your LinkedIn, but the other ones that have other letters in them that are equally as difficult to remember. Now I can't remember them, but I'm sure you know which ones I'm talking about.
The DMA, the DSA, and the DGA. Yeah.
There you go. So it's since it wasn't in this season, but since that has come out, I've talked to a few other people, and they've urged me to look at all of these regulations as like a bundle, right? Not look at them as one specific thing, but look at them as a package. And it feels a little bit like that's what they're trying to do. If I am understanding what you're asking for, or what you say you're trying to say, or am I getting it wrong? Like, how is what the EU proposed bundle regulation different from what you're calling for?
Yeah, so I think the I can't remember the name of the chap we had on now from BWC, the guy who came and talked about the data, the Data Governance Act. Hello, it's like, is your
this is my
special guest.
Yes. She
Hello.
had her tutu and everything.
Can she hear me?
Yeah, no, she can't hear anything, but she can say hi. And
so yeah, so I think what the European Commission are trying to achieve is two things. First of all, to kind of create a you know, the European Union is a common market at the end of the day. It's a, you know, you can be a Spanish company selling in Germany, you can be a citizen of Poland living and working in Italy. The barriers for you to be able to work and travel and sell goods and put products onto the market are to be dismantled. And I guess what the European Commission is trying to achieve is the same thing, the same goals from a digital standpoint. And so there's a lot of talk about this digital common market. And so I think that's the one theme, the one thread that runs through a lot of these new pieces of regulation. And then the other theme is more of about an innovation investment theme, which is trying to assert Europe as a counterweight to the United States and China in the technology industry. And there's a lot of people, I think, who look at what happened in the past. I probably mentioned this before in a previous episode, where, you know, in the sort of late 60s, you know, all of the kind of small independent aircraft manufacturing firms were basically acquired or went out of business, and you were left with kind of Lockheed and Boeing, and that was it. And I think you know, European politicians realized that was not a desirable situation for a kind of economic perspective, but maybe also from a sort of defense perspective as well, and decided to create a counterweight to Boeing. And Airbus was born, and it's been very successful as a kind of duopoly against Boeing. And now, but Airbus is perhaps the stronger of the two players, because Boeing has made a few mistakes recently. So I guess that there's that kind of idea in Brussels that maybe Europe can achieve the same against Google or Facebook or a few others. But I guess what I'm saying is something different. I guess what I'm saying is that we should have a little bit more respect for protocols, because protocols create markets, and Facebook kind of owns the rails, but it also owns the protocol. You can't build a messaging system that integrate with Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. They were designed to be proprietary platforms, and maybe that's the thing that should be, we saw in the sort of 80s and 90s with IBM and their compatible ecosystem of PCs, and versus Apple, that kind of played against Apple for a time, and Apple kind of nearly lost out. And then Apple have kind of resurged and kind of figured out a method, a combination of things, content, the iPod and the iTunes and the music store got a lot of people kind of locked into the Apple platform. Then the App Store kind of locked people in further by buying software that was proprietary. And then with kind of content and data locked into the Apple ecosystem, guess what? If you need a new phone, what are you going to buy? You're going to buy an Apple.
Yeah.
And I think we're in this kind of weird phase now with technology industry where proprietary standards are dominant, not just in the hardware world, but in the software world. Interoperability as a concept is really falling away.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the dysfunction that we have is a consequence of that. And then you've got big tech companies saying, well, content moderation, it's not really our fault. That's the kind of, we don't want to do censorship. That's the job of the government. And, we're not going to do that. And only when it gets really bad, only when the public pressure gets incredibly strong, do they then step in. And, Trump would never have been kicked off Facebook had he not been at the end of his term. If that had happened at the beginning of his presidency, he would still be. I mean, he did many things. It wasn't the first move; it was the final straw. But it was because it was at the end of his presidency that Facebook, I feel, felt empowered to kick him off. And I don't think they would have had that problem had Facebook not been a single platform. And I don't have a problem with them owning the rails. Perhaps, maybe I would. I don't think I have a problem with them owning the rails. What I do have a problem with is the fact that they set the rules for 3 billion people, and that just feels like it's too big to fail. Too much power in one person.
I really like what you said there about the interoperability with not only with hardware and with software. It's a great point that I hadn't thought about, but then as you mention it, it is very apparent that we don't have that. It has kind of fallen by the wayside and we don't get it as much. But speaking of Facebook, while we are on this topic, I think that what Sarah said about her experiences with this whole book that she's been writing and how she went about it, oh my God. That is some crazy stuff that she got into. And really, I think the main thing that stuck out to me on that is when she said, oh, sometimes I would go to mixers in Silicon Valley and people would come up to me and say, I work for XYZ. We are, I can't remember the word that she used, right? It was like, we are Giganticorp evil corp that you speak of, aren't we? And she's like, you do not know how many people think that they work for the evil corp that I'm talking about. And it's just this, that is not a good sign. That's all I have to say. That's not very reassuring.
Yeah. I think that's so true. I mean, I think there's a again, going back to ESG, I think there's a mega trend about to explode around how we treat people in the workplace and the relationship. But I think, the gig economy has kind of been, I think, liberating to so many people and provided flexibility to make their own way of the world. And it's been a really good force in so many respects, but it's also been exploitative and damaging to others. And I think this whole climate has changed now, where it's recognized that gig workers are not independent contractors and they're not employees. They're something different, but they still deserve the same rights as employees had. And if you look at where employment law came out of, and certainly in more sort of socialist countries like we have in Europe versus the United States, there's a lot more worker protection because there was a huge amount of abuse that happened before that. And certainly sort of Victorian working conditions were highly abusive, and we have a largely socialist system as a consequence of that. And I think if we look at the tech industry's relationship to labor, you have these giant content moderation farms in Manila, conveniently far enough away from the United States or Europe that we don't think about these poor people who spend all day looking at the worst filth that people could imagine creating and propagate online. And we make them subcontractors, and then it's a supplier problem. It's not, it's not your problem. And I think there's going to be a massive sea change in attitude towards this. And I think we're starting to see this in the UK. There was a fashion company, or is a fashion company, called Boohoo, and I think everyone saw them as a pretty good outfit, pardon the pun. And then it turns out that their factories, people, the conditions of people in those factories in the UK was substandard, and what was in a supply chain was substandard from a worker protection, worker rights perspective, and a chunk of their share price got wiped out when that news broke. There was a gig working food delivery company, Deliveroo. I've written about them before because I had some issues with how they treated their workers, and
really?
And they were going to IPO, and it
was a bad IPO.
The IPO basically blew up because one of the big investment firms, M&G, refused to invest in them because of the risks. And then most recently, Amazon. I mean, Amazon to me is the best example of a watermelon. A company that looks green on the outside, but is really not that great when you look behind the surface. It's very quickly yellow when you scratch the surface, and then deeply red in the middle. You've got Amazon delivery drivers pissing in bottles, and when Amazon are questioned about it, they're like, "Oh, this is nonsense. This is a made-up fake news. Don't believe it." And then, after enough heat gets turned up, they finally say, "Yeah, actually, that's a thing that happens. We're sorry." And so I think this whole question is gonna, but how social media platforms, how they respond to this, I just don't know how they can, because it's unscalable. You can't have people doing these roles and expect it to scale. You're never going to be able to play whack-a-mole sufficiently well to be able to get rid of this stuff. And I think that's the other kind of problem with social media, is that unlike, let's say, Wikipedia, if I was to publish something on Wikipedia and it was wrong, you could come on immediately and take it down. So if I went onto Donald Trump's Wikipedia page and write some hatred about him, it would be gone in an instant. And I just wonder whether social media needs to be set up in a similar way, that we don't need content moderation, because if you put anything up on social media that was offensive, it would be immediately removed. And maybe that threat would be enough for people to kind of moderate what they say, because that's the problem, really, is that people somehow feel it's okay to write awful things online or to post pictures and videos which should never have been created. And we somehow need to stop that being okay. So yes, that's kind of my view. I think the conversation and the conversation about regulation is looking at the wrong questions.
Well,
and you're
I
having
find
your
it interesting.
dusted right now.
Yeah. For everyone that's just
For those
listening.
of you listening.
Yeah. You're missing out on my
You
daughter.
should watch the
coming
YouTube
around.
instead. It's much more entertaining.
She's jumping in the frame with her peacock feather and dusting off my guitar. But I find it interesting, especially considering what you were talking about at the beginning and not making the business case for ESG. But then you do mention, oh yeah, Deliveroo had a horrible outcome when it came to their IPO because of the factors that went into it with the and I'm not knowledgeable enough, but it was factors that, what was it exactly that made them have this, that this investment firm didn't want to invest?
I think it was just the general, I can't remember if there's a specific question, but I think it was just this general thought that the incentive structures around gig work created a potentially big liability. And it was ESG related. It was, I think M&G's response was that we want to be we want to be an ESG plus organization, and therefore we don't want to have things, we don't want to be investing in watermelons, and we think Deliveroo is going to be this gigantic watermelon, and if we try and pretend it's not that bad, then it's going to come and bite us, and therefore we're just not going to invest. And I think that's the interesting thing about ESG, is that it's really, people are saying, you know, this is in or this is out, and this is in my criteria, this is outside of my criteria. And I guess what I'm saying, different to some other people in the ESG space, is that everyone has a different criteria. So Demetrios's ESG criteria are going to be different to my ESG criteria. I'm sure there's going to be lots of similarities, but differences, and that those differences are important and good things. But it's really an in and out job. And I think M&G took a stand and said, Deliveroo, watermelon, out. And I think it caught a lot of people by surprise. And then, yes, it does impact the share price, and as a secondary impact, and it makes the cost of capital higher. And that, yes, and then there's a business case for that. But I think there's a secondary business case, is not, and that only exists because of ESG. And I think that's what I like about ESG, is it's a counterweight against the financial opportunity. And really what you end up with is essentially a triangle. You end up with, you know, three forces at work with each other. You've got ESG, which is about values. How well does this company align to my personal values, or my investment firm's values, or whatever. You've then got financial return. You know, how well is this organization going to generate me future cash flows, profit, dividends, capital growth? And then the third factor is risk. And in the past, it's only been about risk and capital returns. And I think we're introducing that third category of ESG in. And I think that creates a much more balanced view. And then, you know, if you still want to go for profit, then, you know, that's your prerogative. But if you want to have a lighter footprint, then you can have that as well. And the problem today with ESG is that there's not enough transparency, and it's quite easy to be seduced by companies who, you know, are watermelons. They claim to be green and they're not. And I guess how that reflects back to EthicsGrade and the tech industry is that, you know, when you look at I'm desperately not trying to mention any names here, but I'm going to probably fail.
Go on.
So
it's all right.
When you
Nobody
look at a
listens to
company,
this anyway.
Exactly. When you look at a company in its relationship to AI ethics, what we've seen over the last few years has been a rush to publish documents that say these are our ethics principles. So let me give you an example. HSBC as an example of a company which has published a really nice piece of marketing which says these are our principles we believe in, you know, fairness, justice, whatever. I can't remember, but it all sounds very good and it all looks very nice. It's all very glossy, well presented. But so on the face of it, it looks really super. But the question is behind that, what are you doing? What are the controls? How are you making that work? And I'm not saying HSBC is a bad organization. I know a lot of people who work there and been a customer for a very long time, so I'm very happy with them. But unless you can give me that reassurance behind the surface, then I'm afraid it's a potential watermelon. And that's what we see a lot of. And so, when we rated Facebook as an example, I think a lot of people criticized us because we gave Facebook a C, and people said, well, Facebook deserve an F or worse because they are.
You don't do
not
F.
just watermelon.
I learned that one this week. You don't do Fs.
Not an F. But I think the shocking thing is Facebook has spent 120 million bucks on this stuff, and C is still the best they can get. That's as good as it goes for them. And there's other firms who spend a lot less on these things, but have got a better kind of internalization of the issues, and we rate them a lot higher. So I guess that's kind of how I think about ESG. Is it's a counterweight against the financial, and it's and a counterweight against risk, a purely risk-centric approach, which is a more traditional view. And I guess coming to the conversation you had with Rob, I actually wrote to Rob after the episode because I said, like, oh man, we're saying the same thing in different words because there's a huge amount of CDR in ESG and vice versa, and the kind of CDR is an interesting movement because it's very, very popular in Germany and Switzerland and maybe a little bit in France, but it's not quite such a big deal in the UK and the US, and I think these issues are really important. I mean, you kind of dug into this a bit with Rob. I mean, like, what did you kind of read into CDR?
For those listening, what is CDR?
Yeah, sorry, it stands for Corporate Digital Responsibility, and it's a bit of a play on words. So Rob's going to kill me for saying this because I think this is it's just not. It's not how he sees the world, but in the old days, ESG was called corporate social responsibility. And I guess the problem with CSR is that it was a lot of very well-intentioned, well-meaning activities, like a charity run or, donation to a foundation or, gifting stuff to Africa or whatever. But CSR was very kind of tactical, point in time, bottom up, really well-meaning, had impact without question, but different to ESG in that ESG is much more strategic, top-down, operationally entwined. So you could have a company that did like a CSR. You could imagine like Philip Morris doing a kind of charity run for cancer, but the kind of the freaking business model is causing cancer. So, what's the freaking connection between the CSR and the business? Whereas ESG, it's all about getting the business model to align to the values and getting the operational controls aligning to values. So I think ESG is a kind of different class. And I guess that's my criticism of CDR, is that by the play on words saying it's not about corporate social responsibility, but corporate digital responsibility, it's exactly, I think, the way that people should be thinking in terms of their digital footprint and their digital impact. But I guess it needs to be as strategic as ESG. Otherwise, it could be seen as being window dressing or marketing. And Rob will probably really not be very happy me saying these things because I think I'm super aligned to everything that community is doing. I just don't like the name very much. Sorry, Rob. I'm just one person against thousands. I'm nitpicking.
On the name. Well,
I'm nitpicking.
At the end of the day, yeah, if you are.
I'm not going to say this again. You're right, Demetrios. I'm nitpicking.
You're nitpicking on the name, but it's the thought that counts. If they're trying to change things and they're using one name and you're using another, I think that it is. It can't be. Yeah, you can't dunk on them for doing that. I do understand though that the way you're looking at it, like one-off events or these not having a proper strategy around it, that is crucial. And really looking at like the strategy and how it works and so, but I know after speaking to Rob, he has thought about that too. So they look at the strategy and they're trying to make the biggest impact.
I'm not saying they're not thinking about strategy, because they are, and I can pick no fault with what they're doing in that CDR community. It's just, I guess, the connotation of it's a play on words on CSR, And I guess that for me, CSR has a bit of baggage, because CSR, it's not because people were like being manipulative or trying to pretend or greenwash or ethics wash. CSR, I'm not at all suggesting the CSR community was like that, but it's just a category difference between CSR and ESG. And therefore, I think there's a competing argument that people use when they talk about ESG and D, which is a bit of a mouthful. So there are people, so we call ourselves an ESG company, not an ESG&D company, but there are other people out there who talk about ESG&D, where the D stands for digital. And I think the problem with that is, again, what I said earlier, it's about having an acronym that tries to be all things to all people it can get unwieldy. So I'm not particularly a fan of ESG as an acronym, but to me, it means all impact outside of your financial realm. And so to me, ESG or ESG&D is the same thing. It we don't need the D. But I just think that the discipline of disclosures and reporting and the operational controls that requires is the mindset that you need to solve these problems. Whereas CSR was something a bit weaker. And so that's why I don't like the name particularly. So.
It carries the baggage. You've got years of baggage that go with the name.
I'm really gonna get a lot of hate mail after this episode because I do get some. We do need to probably do like kind of listener questions. Maybe we should do that next season.
Yes.
In our recap, we should, rather than us just ramble, we should actually take some questions from people.
Or
but I do get
mail.
a few direct messages on LinkedIn to say, Charles, just shut the fuck up. But sometimes
half of those are from me. And
yeah.
I will take
Thanks,
credit for that one. But no, let's keep rocking. There were some other good sessions that we had, and I want to hear your feedback on them and what you thought.
Well, I guess the only person we haven't talked about is Michael Kollo. And like that was a really, I mean, like, how could I not like Michael? He and I both used to work at Fidelity, so we've got a very strong bond in common. And also, he, like me, is very preoccupied by the impact of automation on jobs, and I think that's a really important area. I guess the thing that I know that when you invite the guests onto the podcast, you make them promise not to do a sales pitch, and you do a really good job of that. Much better than some of the early MLOps episodes, like with Josh Bottom doing a blatant sales pitch.
Calling out names now. Oh my God, I'm gonna get some heat from that. All right, so yeah, next season recap, we're gonna be reading off hate mail.
That's good from Josh Bottom.
Stop saying his name. I'm gonna have to edit that part out.
I just want to know what was in his closet.
No, let's stop talking about this. I'm cutting this whole part out.
No, if you're gonna record a podcast and you're not gonna put a blurred background on, and you're gonna have such a impressive wooden paneled closet behind you,
oh God,
you've got to make sure that you got to know that people are going to be thinking, what is in my closet?
Only you are thinking that. I
was
wasn't
thinking that. I was
that.
just bored, senseless, hearing a sales pitch and like seeing a product demo when it was supposed to be a chat about MLOpsy things and vision and strategy. Anyway, rant over.
Wait. So everyone knows, this was like the 4th episode of the MLOps community. It's gotten better since then. All right, take it away, Charles.
You know, I'm a big fan of the MLOps community. Yeah. But I guess with Michael, I was kind of hoping for a bit of a sales pitch from him, because what his company does is
you just awesome. Explained all of this to say that you wanted the sales pitch. That took a different turn. I was not expecting you to go down that route.
Because what his company does is awesome. I mean, like he does something really, really cool, and I think he's going to have so much impact with it. And he didn't mention it. I mean, what a guy! I really struggle not mentioning EthicsGrade, because I live and breathe this stuff. But I mean, he was super restrained, and I think it was a great conversation. But so I'll do it for him. Fathom, the company where he works, they have data on. They've done a ton of research into the impact of automation in different industries in different countries, and they've got a lot of historical data. They do a lot of work and research with companies so they can sort of back test their data and research with actually what really happens. And so as a consequence, they have a very good understanding of what is in the market from an AI perspective and from an automation perspective and robotics. So they know, what's available today, what is coming down the pipe this year, next 5 years, next 10 years, and they model that. And so if you're, I don't know, HSBC, we spoke to them about them already. If you're HSBC and you want to know how much of your workforce you can automate over the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, then Fathom is like pretty much the best place to go to get that data. And so if you're doing an automation project, like you absolutely want to start with Fathom. And for me, the really exciting thing about Fathom is not so that you can walk into doing automation, knowing and having confidence that you can shave out 3% of your workforce in India and 12% in Mexico and 6% in Brazil. Like the thing that you should do this for is because you can then see how automation is going to be unfairly applied across the different demographics of people you have. And that should really act as a nudge for you to make sure that you are providing the right skills and career trajectories to those people so that they can transition into other forms of work. And what strikes me as really important is that if you've got a big organization, let's take a sort of a small, large company or a big, medium-sized company, let's say about 10,000 people. You probably, a 10,000 person company has probably got something like 2 to 5 people whose entire job is trying to address diversity and inclusion in the workplace. That's all they do. It's in their job title. It's all they do all day long. And they're reporting on gender pay gap. They're looking at stats. They're thinking about how do they recruit better, and that's all they're preoccupied is how do we make this business more diverse. They're probably supported by about 20 people who it's not their day job, but it's part of what they do to recruit more women, people of color, people with disabilities, etc., trying to make the business more diverse and equal. So in that kind of hypothetical 10,000 person organization, you've also probably got 100, 150, 200 people whose job it is to automate the work that gets done in that business. And unless those 150, 200 people are looking at the data in terms of the impact of that automation on women, on people of color, people with disabilities, or other minority groups, then essentially you've got 200 people working against, let's say best case, 25 people. Guess who's going to win? It's the 200. And you can be damn sure that automating the easiest tasks to automate in a large firm, a 10,000 person firm, those tasks are going to be predominantly not white men, not white able-bodied men. You can be pretty damn sure that's the case. And that's the problem. And Fathom solved that problem by basically giving you the data so that you can think about the impact you're having with automation. And the answer is, if you are controlling those levers, you may decide, well, do you know what? In terms of priority, we're not going to automate that department or that function or that particular part of what we do until we've implemented some training, some skills development, some career planning to help those people reposition themselves elsewhere in the firm. And if you don't do that, then you've basically got a small group of people fixing a problem and a large group of people making the problem worse.
Damn, that paints a pretty bleak picture.
But that's why Fathom exists. That's a good sales pitch, isn't it?
Well, he did give a sales pitch. We just cut it out because you told us to. Since you wanted to do it.
Now you tell me. Now you tell me.
No, I think that's fascinating. I really have been harping on a few different things, though, that companies like, because I've been into reading about all the founders' journeys, and I read Shoe Dog, which is the Nike founder, Phil Knight, his like autobiography. And then I also read one about Bezos, and it, it these guys are trying, or at least they paint the picture that they're trying hard to think about these things. But as you just set it up, it's like the way that they set up a system is set up for failure, because they're putting more resources and time and attention into things like that. I just bring up Nike because at the end of the book, they talk about how there was, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but there was a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, where they had the supply chain fiasco where people found out Nike had sweatshops and things like that.
Yeah.
And Phil Knight talked about how he has proactively tried to go into different companies or countries, sorry, and look at the supply chain and uphold standards, but also trying to raise the wages. And he got pushback from the governments of these countries saying that if you did this, our whole economy would collapse. And that was basically his words, right? Like, if you raise the minimum wage of some factory workers, then all of the wages are going to have to go up, and then it's going to lead to a meltdown. And so he got a lot of pushback in these different places when he tried to make things better. And so I think about that, and I think about what you're saying, and it's like, I had a question that I'm trying to formulate, but I can't quite articulate it. It's more along the lines of, all right, there's an effort being made here, because I also, again, going to Amazon's point where you talked about the peeing in a bottle, and I know that Amazon does set up
Not that bottle, hopefully.
the one that I have. Again, why you want to be watching on YouTube, and so you'll understand the jokes. But I think about the idea of Amazon and how they've pledged to go 100% green, and they have also got the working programs where you can get your education. You can get like higher education just because you're an Amazon employee. They have classes in the factories and things like that. And so it's like,
yeah,
efforts are being made, but because of maybe pre-established norms, it's not as easy as just, well, of course it's not easy, right? But I wonder if more should be done, and if us calling for more is just us like wanting to be perfectionists, and no matter what they do, it's never going to be good enough.
I think that's a fair criticism. But I think that just the disparity between Bezos and a delivery driver peeing in a bottle because he's not been given enough loo breaks is such that I think Bezos should like not sleep so well at night until he fixes that problem. And so I don't think, yes, they're doing a lot of good stuff around the environment. I'm not sure how I don't know the detail of everything that Amazon does with regards to its climate work. So maybe I should give them a bit of the benefit of the doubt. But I think they've definitely got some challenges because of the scale of the organization. But I think the thing that they've put first, and I think Bezos' philosophy has been about customer satisfaction, delighting customers. That's always been the thing. And if you do that, everything should go into that delight. And I think the problem with that is the externalities that it creates are, do you know whether my 2-hour delivery slot is so important that the person who delivered it, didn't get to the toilet on time. Maybe my delight isn't the thing that should be so important. Maybe it should be Bezos's own people's delight and their employees. And I think, yes, customer satisfaction may have helped Amazon scale to being the massive financial success that it's been, but I'm not sure financial success is the measure of everything that matters in this world. And I think better organizations, maybe not more financially successful organizations, but better organizations, the ones that put the stakeholders that are most close to them, most immediate to them first. And to me, that's always your employees. And secondly, it's your customers. And if the alignment between your employees and your customers is so out of whack that you find that hard to do, then maybe something wrong with your business model. But I think for me, that's the story about Nike. The book you read, was that I don't know the book. I know a little bit about the story. So this was the founder of Nike who was kind of writing about how he felt a bit remorseful that he couldn't raise the wages in factories. This was
and he talked exactly. He talked about how he wanted.
So that sounds a little bit like Tristan Harris in the Social Dilemma. Kind of saying, I didn't know I was creating this really addictive technology and getting people sucked into rabbit holes and mindlessly scrolling through shitty apps all day long. I mean, that wasn't what I intended to do, It's like, come on, man. So what, you made a documentary to feel bad? You felt bad about it? Or the Nike guy wrote a book just to cleanse and absolve his conscience? I mean, I think it's just bullshit, frankly. I think that's just bullshit. I mean, the Nike, one of the things on the scorecards, which we publish on each company, it actually relates to Nike, and that we published something by an academic called Simon Zedek, which is a really interesting piece of work that was published in the Harvard Business Review in 2004, I think it was, and it relates to his study of Nike. So it's a really interesting story how Nike in the early 90s was seen as this fashionable apparel brand, great quality products, etc., etc. Celebrities sports people were endorsing them, and then all these news stories broke about the human rights abuses in the supply chain, and Nike's response originally was kind of a denial of the issue. Like, there's no problem, there's no issue, and then the heat intensified, and their response changed to a kind of compliant response. They said, we follow all the laws in the countries we do business, and that sounds very much like the story in the book. And then it got worse and worse, and some of the sports personalities, they dropped the brand and life got more difficult for them commercially, and they realized they need to do some things about it, and they did try. And I think what they found is, as they tried to intervene, they made matters worse. And they put in targets, and those targets caused other problems, and it was a real mess for them. And the heat got turned up, and eventually got to the point where people were asking the question, will Nike survive? And it seems as crazy to say that now in 2021, but in whenever it was, the late 90s, that was very much the word of the day. Very similar to like now in Facebook, where people are saying, will Facebook survive? Does Facebook have just so many problems that it just won't work in the long term? Maybe they will fix their shit out, and maybe in 2045, when people listen to this podcast, they'll just find it funny that we even questioned whether Facebook could survive or be successful. But Nike finally kind of got their shit together, and they started to realize that it wasn't. And I think the phases of development, what Zedek calls managerial, and then strategic, and then civil. To me, those things are, doing the right things because it makes you look good. That's the kind of managerial response. The next one, the strategic response, is doing the right things because it's in your interests to do them. And then the civic response is doing the right things for the right reasons. And Nike powered through those three phases finally at the end. And when Zedek wrote his piece in 2004, Nike was seen as a kind of a statesman within that community. You know, they were seen as a really good player, and they were the organization that was convening the other fashion brands to also sort their human rights problems out. And when I read this, it was actually Dorothea Bauer who introduced me to ZDEC and the Harvard Business Review piece. When I read this and a story about Nike, there was this and this is a story of history repeating itself again. There's a very, very strong parallel between that and what we do around AI ethics and technology governance. And if you look at, Facebook or Huawei, Google, they've all had a very similar, Huawei often says, we don't break laws in the countries we do business. And that might well be true, but is their response more mature than that? And our research says, no, it's not more mature than that. Facebook can largely kind of deny there's even a problem. Google certainly have. What we are seeing is companies like Microsoft and IBM who are taking more kind of responsibility for things, and say, particularly Microsoft and IBM, realizing that these things are important to do, not because it's in their interest, but because it's the right thing to do, full stop. And I think this is the kind of the phasing. So I guess it's a very long way of saying, kind of calling bullshit on the book. Maybe I should read the book before I call judgment. But
well, it goes back to this idea, and it feels like this is the theme of our conversation today, is leading with morals, not leading with the business case. And it's what we started the conversation with. I feel like we are finishing the conversation with it right now. It's that what you called from this ZDEC research, it's the civil part, right? And seeing that the civil part is really where you feel companies should be coming from. They should be leading from the civil part, not because it's going to give us some kind of business value, or not because there's that we're following the regulations or whatever that excuse is. It's because it's the right thing to do. And then you go into, okay, it's the right thing to do. Morals are a very slippery slope. And as you mentioned before, the right thing for one group of people might not be the right thing for another group of people. So that's where you get to really dig in and see what are the morals of a company and what are the morals of the person that's leading the company.
Yeah, you summed it up.
There we go. I guess that means we're done. We've done another one of these recap episodes. Is there anything else you want to share?
We run out of things to say. This would be a first.
You
so
didn't
what have
talk
you got
about.
next season,
wait. You didn't talk about vaccine passports.
Was that the trap that you left me with last time?
Yeah, and now we got to go.
Just triggered me again.
We got to go again. Next time, man, you got to lead with vaccine passports. No, tell me
what's coming up. What's coming up next season? Because I get to listen to these episodes in the car on the way to dropping my kids off. So it's as much a surprise to me as it is to anyone. So tell me.
No. I have no idea, to be honest. I'd have to go look at it. And right now, my whole technology setup has been dismantled. It's a miracle that this mic is even working. My camera I use is not working. The monitor I use is not working. I've got to send a lot of stuff back. But give me the rant. Give me your 5-second opinion on the vaccine passports. Are they coming?
Oh man, I can't. Do you know what? I got interviewed yesterday for another podcast, an ethics and technology podcast, and they made the mistake of asking me about vaccine passports. And I think it was about 25 minutes later when I finished talking.
So we'll refer
I've never
everyone
seen anyone
to
wrap
that.
up a conversation so quickly. She was like, "So great, always got time for. Thank you very much. Goodbye." That was it.
They heard all.
Let's save that one for next time.
Well,
we'll link to that other rant.
Exactly. We'll link to that rant for anybody that really wants to know about the vaccine passports. I'm afraid if we do have to have them, I don't want vaccine passports, but I think there's a whole conversation we need to have around that.
Oh, you're gonna trigger me. You trigger me. The problem is digital vaccine passports. That's the problem, because if you look at the contact tracing apps that have come out, they require iOS 13 and above, or the latest version of Android, etc. And basically, what that means is that you have to have a mobile phone, that's been made in the last 5 years. And for me, I just find that offensive. The fact that to be allowed to go to a football match or the pub, or to be able to travel abroad, I have to carry around a very expensive device, which I personally don't even want. But maybe I'm in a very big minority of somebody who's come off a smartphone, and therefore I find the idea of digital vaccine passports quite offensive. And I guess what annoys me is that there's no reason why Apple couldn't roll out the contact tracing app to all iPhones, like to the original iPhone. There's no reason, there's no technical barrier at all. It's just that they can't be asked. And secondly, because it's not in their commercial interest, because what they want to do is sell new phones. And I guess that for me is the thing I find the most offensive about digital. And I spoke to somebody in government about this, and they said that they thought it was a kind of digital exclusion problem, and that yes, there were people who don't have smartphones, but they're mostly people in their 80s or poor people. And the solution to those are, we either give poor people mobile phones, or because they can't afford it, and the old people will die off anyway over the next 20 years, so it will no longer be a problem. And then I explained that me, as a perfectly healthy, reasonably wealthy 39-year-old, doesn't have a smartphone, doesn't want a smartphone. It was quite interesting. Watch their face. They're like, "What? Like, why would you not have a smartphone?" And I explained, and we had a very interesting conversation after that. But I think for me, that's the issue. Is there's a bigger question really around how software updates happen within the context of smartphones. And it's basically, it's a business model that's designed to keep us all consuming, keep us all buying, keep us all upgrading, keep us all chasing the next. And my iPhone 4, which is here, it's in perfect condition. It's 10 years old. I've looked after it really well. It works perfectly well. I've replaced the battery. It's fantastic. But it's completely useless because none of the software will run on it, and I can't use it for contact tracing. I can't use it. I won't be able to use it as a digital passport. But there's no reason why. No reason why. So that's my mini rant.
That surprises me. I thought you were going to go down a different path, but all right. I see that argument. For me, it's more about, a piece of paper
is fairly inoffensive.
But so for you don't care if it's a piece of paper, then it's cool. Then the vaccine passport, if it's a piece of paper, you're on board with it. You don't mind the idea of people that don't get the vaccine, they're playing with fire and they figure out their own shit.
Yeah, I was actually looking in my drawer because I thought I might have. I've got I might actually have it somewhere at the back of my drawer. I'm not going to find it, Steve. I'm not going to find it.
For the next episode.
I have my my yellow fever vaccination passport, which I had to have when I went to, was it India, maybe? Or
yeah, I think I got
that
too,
so
when I went
it's a yellow card. It goes in my passport, and I took it out and got it stamped, and that was that. And I don't think it's really much of a big deal. For traveling, at least, I don't have a big deal about it. To go to the pub, go to football match, like, I don't find it too much of a worry. I guess what I would be worried about is if we had to wear a badge to say we had been
vaccinated,
or worse, maybe a badge to say we hadn't been vaccinated. Now that would be really bad. That I would have a problem with. That suddenly feels a little bit Third Reich again. But
for me, I think the idea of the digital vaccine passport is one that Yoav brought up a few seasons ago, and it's really around how this data is going to be passed around and who is going to have access of this data, and how are they going to make sure that they have the right data access levels. All of those questions start really complicating the problem. And
yeah,
I feel like it's going to default to, well, just give them all the data that they need. And then all this data is being passed around that doesn't necessarily need to be. And so that big question mark is where I get a little bit nervous with the digital vaccine passport.
So for example, this is a live problem in the UK right now. So every single person in my team, I know their name, obviously, I know their date of birth, and I know their postcode. I could go to the government vaccine registration website, type in their name, their date of birth, and their postcode, and what I would get would be one of three messages. One message to say, please book your first vaccine appointment. Second message would be, please book your second vaccine appointment. Or third, you've already been vaccinated, you don't need to book an appointment. So I could easily look up any of my employees and find out whether they've been vaccinated or not. Now, I've got no interest in doing so, and I think it would be absolutely abhorrent if I were to. But like, what the fuck are we doing? Building a system where the data controls are so weak that that's possible. And the government's response, as far as I can tell, in the last 48 hours since the news broke, was kind of, you know, we wanted to make it easy for people.
Yeah,
so
it's the price we got to pay.
Deal with it. I think that, so you're right. The controls around this stuff, the quality of design sucks. And the UK has been really good historically at its kind of transformation to digital government. I mean, I think the early days of that transition, the UK was phenomenal, world class. And it's just really embarrassing. The last couple of years, we've lost our grip of this stuff. And I think this whole thing right now about vaccine booking service is really awful. I mean, a lot of people are just like, yeah, whatever, who cares? But the fact that that data is out there, the fact that if you knew my date of birth and my postcode, you could find out whether I've been vaccinated or not. I think that's just insane. But I think the other issue is this, you know, if we create a digital first system, which I worry that we're going to create, certainly in Europe, it looks like that might be happening, a digital first system, not a paper first system. Then as long as it's open to all devices, regardless of age, and yes, there's some cyber risk in that, but there's mitigants against that, I would have much less of a problem. But looking it into iOS version 13 and above, I really have an issue with that, because that's essentially creating an Apple tax or Google tax, whereby if you want a freedom of movement, freedom of travel, freedom to come and go, you've got to pay. You got to pay Mr. Cook, or
that's incredible.
Or,
that's what gets you the most fired up. That's not exactly where I thought it was going to go, but I like the argument. And
what I've learned is I need to go and find my yellow fever vaccination card to use as a prompt next time I want to have
these
a rant on this topic.
Yet another reason why you should be watching us on YouTube. And for the next season, leave a comment or just message Charles directly. And
no.
We're going to get to your questions.
Unless you're related to me or I actually have your, contact details, please don't direct message me on LinkedIn with hate, spam, and abuse.
Yes.
But commenting is great, good and bad. And I think it would be fun if we can take a couple of questions from our listenership, watcher, viewership next time. Hopefully I haven't triggered anyone else into ranting, but
just the 5 people that you've already triggered in this conversation.
Well, the people that probably definitely trigger right now are my immediate family who are waiting for me to come home for supper. So I should probably go. You're probably long past supper.
Yeah, but today's Friday, so I fast on Fridays.
It's always a pleasure. I love our conversations, and it feels to me like I have 7 hours talking to you every month because I listen to your other conversations. So
and you're just sitting there chomping at the bit. Well,
I
I
get
should have
this
said
chance.
that. Why didn't he talk about this? And then you text me afterwards.
And now I get an hour and a half of ranting about it. So,
Yep.
Right. Anyone who was listening at the start is now gone. So
All right,
it's just
we'll
you and
see
me
you
now.
later. Yeah, it's just you and I. That's true. All right, man.
Cheerio.
Have a
Have
great
a good
day.
weekend.